Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to DEI Friday. Today is October 21st. We are so happy to have you here with us to learn about how to support neurodiversity in the workplace as well as the classroom. My name is Anna D'Souza. I'm a professor at the Marxe Schools. DEI Friday comes to you out of the Marxe DEI committee. We are creating, space to talk about issues that are important to us, everyone here in this room, around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We are also trying to just build space to connect with each other, to break down the silos between the three schools. Everyone here is invited, as well as the silos between faculty and staff. So happy to see both faculty and staff in the room. And we already have some students here, and we were so happy because students, most of the stuff we're doing is for you. we do care about ourselves, and we're trying to care about ourselves more. Self-care is one of the tenets here at DEI Fridays, where we also want to nourish ourselves during this hour, but we're so happy that you're here with us, students. So without going further there, what we're going to start with for today is a little bit of grounding. As y'all know me, I need to ground myself when I'm with you because I get so excited to be here in this space with all my colleagues and friends. Even when I see just your names here, the people who don't have photos up, which is okay, I still feel happy because Zoanne, I don't know you. You've never been here before. Welcome, okay? Carrie Stevens, welcome. Joshua, welcome. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Today's grounding is to be real short and sweet, because I want to give most of the time to Kristina and to Kristina Anderson, our guest speaker, as well as to your breakout sessions, because I know y'all love that. So we're only going to do about 45 seconds of breathing. And this time I'm going to encourage you to really do that on your own. So I'm going to give you the principles, and then I'm going to be quiet. No music, no sound. We're just going to lean into silence and spaciousness on this Friday afternoon, beautiful fall afternoon. And we're going to do that to try and ground ourselves and center ourselves, to have an open mind, an open heart to what we're going to hear today, and figure out ways that we can support ourselves and others we know with, with strategies that Kristina is going to share with us. All right, so only 45 seconds, may feel like a long time for some, shorter for others. The plan is to focus on getting yourself physically comfortable. I invite you to close your eyes, let your eyes close. Get yourself physically comfortable wherever you are, make any adjustments or stretches you need. And then just for about 40 seconds, we are going to take some deep breaths together. Slow inhales through the nose and slow, deep exhales through the mouth. And I'll let you know when we're done with our time, okay? Okay, so as you let your breathing go back to its normal rhythm, just slowly flutter open your eyes if they were closed. Kind of take the light back in, maybe look around where you are, and let us begin this session. So again, I thank you all for being here. This is DEI Fridays, hosted by the Marxe DEI community. And we're going to start, I'm going to first drop in the chat a real quick survey. If you're interested in telling us a little bit about what you'd like to see in other Marxe DEI Fridays, I am now going to have us read the community agreements. This is part of why, just to kind of ground us to what we're going to be doing here. I will invite folks to just unmute, and you can put your hand up real quick and unmute and read 2 of these each. I will start with Teresa, since you're front and center here, and I'm going to go to Kristina. Go ahead, Teresa.
We are a community in progress. We can struggle together, we can grow together. We will practice active listening, respectful language, and kindness.
Thank you. Kristina?
We can ask for literacy moments when there are unfamiliar terms. We assume positive intent, and we also take responsibility for impact.
Thank you. Would someone else like to continue? Go ahead. Yes, please. Unmute. Go ahead, Tamara.
Okay. We value each other's lived experiences. We appreciate their vulnerability and sharing. We are willing to slow down discussions to facilitate the exploration of complex, nuanced issues.
Thank you. And then finally, we are prepared for discomfort around these topics. If it seems inappropriate or harmful, we pause the discussion and may ask folks to discuss privately with facilitators. If you need support during the presentation, please just direct message me, okay? Don't send that message to Kristina Anderson, who is our very welcome guest today. So Kristina, I would like to first thank Kristina Balboa, who is also in the room, who helped identify the speaker for today's event. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Kristina Anderson is a Minnesota native who has been on the East Coast for about 12 years. Her bachelor's and master's degrees are in psychology, both from a small private liberal arts college in Minnesota. She is ABD in family social science at the University of Minnesota. Kristina has worked with individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders and other intellectual and developmental disabilities since 2003. She's currently working as a consultant with the New York City's Administration for Children's Services. She provides clinical support to children in protective specialists, or to child protective specialists, excuse me. Kristina's research interests include autism and the family, trauma in children and adults with autism, and the long-term effects of historical trauma on Indigenous people. Kristina and her husband live across the Hudson River from Manhattan with their 3 neurotic pugs. So welcome, Kristina. So happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
I'm gonna drop this in the chat. Today we're gonna be in conversation. As you know, most of these Fridays we have kind of a discussion and then we have some breakout sessions. And so the plan today is we're going to first start with some active learning. We're going to put a Mentimeter on, which you all know I love that kind of stuff. So we're going to have you do a quick participation exercise. Then I'm going to have some questions for Kristina. If you have questions for her, please drop them in the chat as well. Then we are going to move on to a breakout room where you get to chat with each other. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to come back together. Okay, so that is the plan. I'd like you all to go right now to the Mentimeter link and please put your answers in for the general question that we have here, which is what comes to mind when you think of neurodiversity? Okay, what comes to mind when you think of neurodiversity? Thank you. Please feel free to type in what you know. I know that not all of you know what neurodiversity is, and that's okay. That's part of the reason you're showing up today. And so any questions you have, any comments, any experience with this, please share it here. So we see things like the spectrums, other ways of expressing different learning styles and ways of interacting with the world. So now we will start with the interview portion. And Kristina, let's start with the basics, since there were many different definitions here. And where are you, my screen? There you are. Okay, so hi, Kristina. So there are different definitions. Why don't we start with, what neurodiversity is, please? We're good. Yep.
Okay, so neurodiversity. I also enjoy weird fonts, so bear with me. I want to start with one of the most what's happening with my computer? My computer's been giving me fits this last week, but one of the most well-known neurodiverse people out there is a woman named Temple Grandin, who was diagnosed with autism quite early in life. And one of her quotes is, "The world needs all types of minds." And I think you kind of got into that with the Mentimeter, talking about just different ways of thinking. And quite honestly, that's what neurodiversity is. There are neurological differences and variations. A lot of times it refers to conditions that were previously thought of as defective or pathological. What's nice about neurodiversity is it takes in both strengths and deficits and helps work with, build on the strengths and improve the deficits. It considers differences within individuals rather than between. So in other words, rather than comparing someone with ADHD, a child with ADHD, to the kid sitting next to them who's neurotypical, it just looks at that child with ADHD. And one of the terms or the phrases that I use when dealing and talking about neurodiversity is brains that work differently. They're not defective, they're just different. So
Thank you. So, can you expand a little bit and kind of give some context for either workplaces or classrooms and like different, maybe you can, I guess, like maybe we can start with just like getting into more detail, right? You mentioned kind of autism or ADHD or something like
Yeah.
that. Can you describe this in the context of the DSM, manual, and maybe tell people a little bit about that, what the manual is, and yeah.
So the DSM-5, which is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, is kind of like the psychiatric Bible. It's what we use to evaluate and diagnose mental health conditions. The most recent version, the DSM-5, came out almost 10 years ago. And what they did is the first chapter is all neurodevelopmental disorders. How neurodiversity kind of started with the autism self-advocacy movement. Those folks on what's now we now consider like the level 1 functioning of autism, those high functioning folks were, not wanting to be grouped with the ones who aren't as high functioning. That's kind of where it started. If you look up neurodiversity online, a lot of what you're going to see is autism spectrum disorders. That's kind of the big one. ADHD, dyslexia, and some of the other learning disorders like dyscalculia and dysgraphia, so the math and the writing. And then there's something called developmental coordination disorder, or dyspraxia, tic disorders, things like that. So things that affect your movement. What you hear less about are language disorders like stuttering or social communication disorder, intellectual disability, that IQ under 70, psychiatric disorders. We don't always think that someone with depression or bipolar or schizophrenia is neurodiverse, but you know what, their brain works differently. And then the one that kind of catches my interest is sensory processing disorder. And, wanting to be transparent, as an adult, I was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder and ADHD, which made a difference because I barely made it through undergrad. But once I got that, and like the strategies you're talking about, that's how I got through graduate school, and 2 different kinds of graduate schools. So
Kristina, can you tell us more detail about sensory disorder that you just mentioned?
Yeah, you don't even know how much I like talking about sensory processing disorder. It's a whole nother hour.
Sensory processing disorder. Okay, go ahead.
Correct.
We'll maybe come for DEI Friday next spring on that one. Okay, go ahead.
So just a quick, and I can't see the chart right now. I kind of can. How many senses are you all aware of? How many senses do you think we have? What did you learn in elementary school? 5. Yeah, there's 8. We have 8 senses. There's the one that we know: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. We know those. But there's also vestibular sense. That's your sense of balance, making sure that your head is this way and not tipping over. There's something called proprioceptive, which is where your body is in your environment. This is what keeps us from crashing into things. Those kids that look like absolute putzes because they trip and fall, their proprioceptive senses are off. And then there's the 8th one is interoceptive. This is the one that tells you you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're sad, you're hurt, whatever. Just a quick example, interoceptive. One of the cases I reviewed for ACS, probably a 6-year-old girl with autism fell at the playground, broke her arm, got up, kept playing. Nobody knew she had broken her arm until the next day when mom saw it was so swollen. Her interoceptive sense wasn't telling her that maybe you need to stop playing on the playground because you're hurt. So that's kind of what it's sensory processing is when you were taking in information from the environment. All those senses are working together, and it's like a filter. So we pay attention to the things we need to pay attention to, and the rest of it gets filtered out. If I were in the room with all of you, I would ask you to pay attention to the fluorescent lights overhead. And I did like trips people up, because now all of a sudden you hear the buzzing. Our brains work to filter that out so that we don't hear that buzzing, or we don't notice like the ceiling fan going. Someone with a sensory processing disorder can't necessarily filter that stuff out.
And so when we think of students and colleagues, what you missed is that I put in the chat what Kristina Balboa had shared with me, that this week is a week to think about and support people with invisible disabilities. And so I'm just kind of curious as to if you can, speak a little bit to that, right? To the fact that kind of how that's changed over time, maybe invisible versus visible and versus stigmas and lack of stigma, and just because you're working in this area and you work with so many people over the past, 20 years, how have you seen that changing? Even your experience just like with ACS and different sort of, services in that sense. I'm just curious as to, even what you described in terms of the history of this term, right? It was people who were wanting to separate, right? Here at DEI Fridays, we're thinking about the different structural systems, right, that are there, systems of oppression and also separation. And like one of the reasons we're trying to come together, right, is that we're building community to break down these silos, right, to think about what we have in common. And what's interesting to me is that even in an area like this, where there was advocacy for this term, right? Instead of separating people who are autistic, but thinking about it, okay, it's just ways of thinking. Like you said, people's brains work differently. And so instead of kind of separating, they're autistic over here. But what I heard you say is that it was people who were like the highly functioning autistic people who were wanting to almost separate from those on the initial, autism spectrum who are less. Yeah. So can you speak a little bit more to that?
And I think to that last statement is, those higher functioning folks, those, Sheldon Cooper and Bill Gates or whoever, not them in particular, but kind of wanting to make it known that like they're not broken. They can do just as much as what anyone else can do. They just might need something tweaked in their environment. One of my internships was with emotional behavioral disordered kids in a day treatment program. And one of the teachers was old school. When you sit at your desk, both feet on the ground, hands up, folded at your desk. And let me tell you, those kids were falling apart all the time. So part of what I did, and I don't even know if I'm answering your question because my brain goes in 7 different directions, was say, you know what, it doesn't always have to look that way. So one kid's on a bouncy ball or one of those exercise balls. The other kid is sitting sideways in his desk, and now all of a sudden they're focusing. One kid's got putty, playing with that. One kid is brushing his hand with a clean paintbrush. The classroom looked chaotic, but they were focused because I was thinking outside of the box. How can we help these kids? Someone put in the chat, ADHD is overdiagnosed, and it might be people with sensory processing disorder. Absolutely. So part of my work with ACS is to look at the kids who are referred, for whatever reason, their family is referred to ACS. And this kid's got this behavior disorder, and that one's got ADHD, and this one's ODD, and this one's non-compliant. And it's like, get them evaluated by an OT, because it might be more to it than this, especially the kids that can't sit still. Yeah, it's hard to focus when you can't sit still, but it might be something else that we can do about it.
Right, and can you speak to that a little bit? So I think what's very interesting in this work, Kristina Balboa had mentioned during the little break, that when you start doing some research on this, a lot of the resources that come up are focused on K through 12. I've found the same thing, right? A lot of educational, when we looked at pedagogy, actually, there's a ton that's K through 12 that I actually think in many ways are quite applicable to college settings, at least undergraduate settings. And I'm wondering, when you said, you gave that really clear example of what some students, what one can do for kids, right, or children. And have you heard of any, kind of adaptations like that for higher education? college classrooms, and please feel free. Kristina put it in the chat. Kristina Balboa puts some student in her class, right? And I'm just kind of curious if there anyone here in our room who has had that experiences with their students.
Again, like totally personal sharing. When I got to my doctoral program, like I came clean to my professors, like, listen, I'm going to look different in the classroom. You got doctoral students are, very mature, very much into the academic part. And here I am squirrely in the back of the room. But one of the things that they made clear and, really helped is I can get up and walk around. That helps, because sitting still, and you can see when I'm here, even I'm constantly moving. Being able to get up and just walk in the back of the room, sitting sideways in my chair, taking notes about everything, really was really helpful for me. Those kinds of things. I did have one of my references is
references in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, and this might have been a new one too. How neurodiversity in higher education.
Okay.
How do you approach that? And I'll put these in the chat in a minute.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I
appreciate it. In there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Oh, go ahead, Kristina, please.
I think part of it is just, being open-minded that not everyone looks the same way. Not everyone hears information the right way. I can listen to you talk, but I'm not going to remember what you said. But if I write it down, I get it, because I can remember that. And that's one of the things, they talk about executive functioning in short-term memory and working memory. And like, you tell me something and I'll like forget about it before I get downstairs, or because that's how my brain works. And that's part of neurodiversity.
So would you suggest that for faculty, because some of the questions in the chat are really about specific strategies we can do, and I'm going to talk about faculty just for one moment, and then we can kind of talk about staff similarly, especially student-facing staff, but also just again supporting our coworkers. So one thing I'm hearing you say is that, first of all, understanding what these different psychological or neurological disorders are, like what that means and what the terms are, and that I think we'll put these together, by the way, on the DEI Friday website, right? So you'll have these as well. So we'll have those kind of terms there, and then what I'm hearing from you is that if this is, part of this is about executive functioning, right? And part of this, I would say, is also about, people learning how to learn, right? For their specific style. Because all of us faculty and staff, we know this, right? We know, oh, some people are visual learners, some people like auditory. We hear those things, right? But I don't think I can speak for myself that I didn't really understand what that meant, right? I think I understood my own style of learning, and I think I'm definitely a visual learner. I knew that part myself, but I didn't know the possibilities, right, for types of learning. And so I think the step first before thinking about how to accommodate students is also like, what are the different styles of learning? What are things that work and don't work for students? And how can we be mindful when we're putting our courses together? So one is thinking about universal design for learning. I'll put some information about in the chat, and those are being really sensitive to this variety of styles and creating your course in a way that makes it accessible to people, right? Everything from not being able to read your text very well to, audio visual to so there are various things for like the design of the course. But the last thing I want to say is, Kristina, what stood out to me is when you said, you explained to your professors, right? You told them, hey, this is what I need. I may like go and stand up in the back. Is that okay, right? And I've had students come and talk to me about that and many different things that they need or what they want and or that will help them. And I think one of the reasons they come to me is because in the syllabus and in the pre-class survey that I have students fill out, I ask specifically, what can I do? What should I know? Or what can I do to support you in this class? Like, help me support you. And I think that question, I used to have a question, is there anything else you want to let me know? Or tell me anything about your learning style? I put those questions, but sometimes students would say, I don't even know what you mean by my learning style. So I think like, in one concrete suggestion for me, at least, and other people who have taught, please chime in the chat or unmute yourselves. It's really about having students realize that you want to support them. And so knowing that, I think, is part of building that connection with students so that they are able to, with you, figure it out. There's also, of course, our Office of Disability Services, and they help our students a lot in certain ways to be able to advocate for themselves. But I think our role as faculty is to make it very clear that we care about their learning, and that we are ready to adapt, right? So go ahead, Kristina, please.
No, one of the things, I put the references, and I think it's a Clouder article that's neurodiversity in higher education. There's a lot of folks who, students, young people who are absolutely horrified to come out as neurodiverse because they're afraid of the stigma. Oh, you have autism, therefore you can't do this. Or, oh, you have dyslexia, well, this is going to be too hard for you. But with those adjustments, if they're able to speak up for themselves and feel like it's a supportive environment, which it sounds like you guys are trying to make, then making those disclosures isn't as scary. And I don't know if that's something you could do in a syllabus, or if it's, part of the whole culture is like, we all learn differently and it's okay. You go back to that Temple Grandin's quote, like the world needs all types of minds, and everybody's got something to contribute.
Right, I appreciate that. So why don't we do this right now? We're gonna break out into breakout groups as usual. We are gonna have a few minutes, if I can fix this breakout group. Okay, we are gonna have about 10 minutes for y'all to chat with each other. The reflection question will really be around two things. Initially, Kristina Anderson and I had talked about thinking about ways that you yourself deal with overwhelm. That you yourself, some of the folks that are neurodivergent, part of what it is, as Kristina was mentioning, is this, executive functioning, right? Part of it is like, with the overwhelm that you feel, right? In terms of the sensory processing as an example. So the questions that I want you to think about and chat about together is one, I'll put this in the chat in a second. One, what you yourself do in your own experience, whether or not you're in this neurodivergent under this umbrella, what you have done, strategies you do when you feel overwhelmed. And also let's continue what's happening in the chat, which is sharing different experiences. Feel free again to share as much or as little as you want in terms of personal sharing about these things. This is a very personal, sensitive topic. Some people have already shared very openly and vulnerably in the chat, and it's very appreciated. This is a community, the chat is not on video, it's not there, and that's on purpose, and your breakout rooms are not recorded either. And so I welcome you to be as open as you can with your colleagues and feel comfortable. And so I'm going to put these in the chat. I'm going to give you your breakout groups, and I will see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, thanks everyone. Welcome back. I know that the breakout sessions are often the most popular part of DEI Friday, so I hope that you enjoyed that. I would like to do a couple of things in our last moments together. One is touch on a few of the things that came up in the chat earlier. We have a bunch of resources that you all have shared in the chat, and I appreciate it. I'm going to put them on our DEI website. I want to say that a few folks mentioned how the office at Baruch, Student Disability Services, is something that we can not just put on our syllabi, of course, but is something that we can direct students there. But I also want to remind you, for those of you who were not coming to our DEI events, didn't know about them last year, on our website, the Marxe DEI website, we have recordings of our past events. And last year, we had an event called Demystifying Disability. And I think that event really complements the event that we have today. And we had the director of the Baruch Student Disability Services come and kind of talk more about services in the context of our classrooms and the context of our students. So I want to put that out there to you. I also want to name one thing that Pablo, colleague here, had brought up in the chat, which is this idea, Kristina Anderson, where are you on my screen? Oh, there you are. Hi. Okay, thank you. I wanted you to speak a little bit to this idea of, I don't know how we would call it. One thing is kind of disclosing. He called it, coming out with some sort of either neurodivergent diagnosis yourself, or just like another kind of challenge that you have in your life. And that's something that I think is always a question, not just in the classroom, but in the workplace. One of my colleagues just recently, we had a meeting, and afterwards she asked me if she had, overshared, right? Or maybe it wasn't oversharing. And if you know me, like many of you do, I don't really, the model of oversharing to me is, it's hard for me to think about what that would mean, because I really share a lot. And I think part of me leans into sharing because I think to show our humanity is to go against the system that is so dehumanizing in so many ways. However, we understand that there are strong boundaries between certainly faculty and students, instructors and students, that I think we need to be very aware of, and the power dynamic there, as well as with our colleagues, right? Professional boundaries, power, hierarchical boundaries. And so I'd like you to speak to that a little bit if you can, just thinking about even in your work, how do you navigate that, thinking about those boundaries?
That's a really good question. I have to say I've been very fortunate. My current director is like completely open to that. She asks me way too many questions. I'm like, listen, you need to stop. You wanting me to share more. But when I was in graduate school, I worked with one of my advisors, said, listen, this is what's going on. How can I share that with the rest of the faculty in this program so that they understand that I'm paying attention? It just might not look like it or whatever. But having that trusted person that you can kind of rely on to help you through the process was really what helped me. And again, now knowing that my supervisor is completely open to it, and knowing that maybe my desk looks a little different, and maybe I have, scribbles that make sense to me, but no one else. But that's okay. That's how I function.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and in the few minutes we have left, I only have 1 minute left, actually. So, okay, I'll just put it out there as more of a comment, thought to the world, that, some of the framing that we tend to go to, even in these spaces, which are, spaces focused on better understanding DEI stuff, right? Thank you, Jenny. Oh, sorry, that was individual, but okay, thanks. Nice seeing you. I know some of you have meetings, and so I appreciate you. And so if you have to go, just please remember, we'll have another DEI Friday in 2 weeks. It's on trauma-informed pedagogy. It's going to be wonderful. We have our own Jael Amador, who's a counselor in our counseling center, coming, and a wonderful human being from Borough of Manhattan Community College. Her name is Jean Amaral, and they're going to be talking about trauma-informed pedagogy with some of our amazing psychology students, master students. So that's a quick plug for those of you who have to leave, hard leaving at 1 o'clock exactly. But I just wanted to follow up on Kristina, when you were describing just now how you got through graduate school and what you were thinking about and how you were kind of advocating for yourself and figuring out how to navigate that. To me, one of the things that comes up there is the focus on the individual who is having the challenges, who is thinking differently, and who wants to advocate for themselves in the situation. And so, yes, we agree with agency and advocacy. And I guess one of the things I'm always thinking about, and many of us in the Marxe DEI community and other communities who are here, shout out to Curb members and to incubator members here, what we're always thinking about is the systemic, right? The systemic and the structural issues, and how we at Baruch can change those so that we're changing rather than, putting the onus, and I know it's not either or, but a lot of the onus falls on the folks who need that accommodation, right? The students have to go to Student Disability Services, get diagnosed, get all those things, bring the form, bring it to the professor, right? And I think we were touching on this a little bit, some of us, and maybe this is something that came up in your breakout sessions, what we can do proactively, to build a community that has more spaciousness, right? For all folks, like you said, folks who, make the world beautiful and colorful and think differently. So yeah, so that's just the kind of in closing, I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts about kind of this more structural aspects of this.
I think, and we kind of talked about this too in our breakout group, is how do we raise awareness in the general world that there are differences in learning? And then it doesn't put it on, all the onus on that individual. It's kind of like, working with intellectual developmental disabilities for so long. And everyone's like, oh, you know, that's great that they're going to the store by themselves. I'm like, it's not great. That should be what they're doing. How do we open it up to people to understand that someone with a different way of thinking with neurodiversity or developmental disability, they are capable of doing everything that the neurotypical are. So it's kind of a switch, I guess, in society. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, right? That's what we're trying to do here.
Mhm.
That's what we're trying to do at Baruch. We're trying to change the culture. We're literally here learning together for this reason, and so I appreciate that, because that shares the work and shares the labor. It's labor of love, trying to educate ourselves so we understand each other better, and that, of course, then just that knowledge is powerful, right? Just that knowledge of normalizing these differences across people, right? That then I think brings power to discussion, individual discussions, right? Because I think hurt comes. A few people in the chat had mentioned things about, you know, what are the language we should use, or should we say disabled person, or a person with a disability?
Person with a disability, yeah.
Exactly, right. So now the language, but although last year, you know, we were talking about how some people still like to own that, you know, so there's a lot of, you know, discussion about that within the community of, you know, people with disabilities. And so anyway, so I just think that it's really important here to always think about these kind of different levels of differences. And on that note, I will start wrapping up. And first, I'm going to say thank you to everyone who's watching right now, everyone who's here in the room.